From the studios of KPFK Pacifica Radio in Los Angeles, this is Uprising, and I'm Sonali. It's Thursday, August 20th, 2015. New York police have been surveilling activists with Black Lives Matter. We'll speak with George Joseph, reporter for the Intercept, who obtained internal documents on the story. And Chaédria LaBouvier, a reporter with Elle Magazine, recently witnessed a large number of police officers abusing a homeless, disabled African-American man in San Francisco. She captured the entire incident on video and will join us in studio to discuss it. That's coming up after the news. Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika. He's an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks for joining us. Protests rocked St. Louis, Missouri last night against the police killing of an 18-year-old African-American boy named Mansour Ball-Bey. Police arrested 9 people in an area not far from Ferguson. The fatal police shooting took place yesterday afternoon when officers say they were attempting to execute a search warrant. This is how NBC News described it. Quote, according to police, 2 officers were executing a search warrant at a home in a crime-plagued neighborhood. When 2 armed men fled out the back, the officers shot Mansour Ball-Bey, 18, after he turned and pointed a gun at them, police said. End of quote. One resident of the area told Associated Press what could have been done different to de-escalate rather than escalate. The police come in with an us against them mentality, and you've got to have the right kind of cops to engage in these types of neighborhoods. Well, Chenjerai, what do you make of this shooting? There isn't yet video documentation of anything, as it's very early, but any initial thoughts?
Well, I think that this is yet another example where we have police who are trying to execute something as simple as a search warrant and a person winds up dead. This points to the deep systemic problems in policing in this area that have now been documented by the Justice Department, and also the systemic problems that exist across the country. Now, protesters have also been victimized in terms of their response to this protest, also recently in their protests on the year anniversary of Michael Brown. So one other thing I just want to point out, we have this new police chief, Sam Dodson, and they started a community engagement team. But what I've learned from people on the ground is that one of the people heading the team is a police officer named Harry Dilworth, who's known as being a cop who's very oppressive to protesters with poor community relations. So, I don't know, things aren't looking very good.
And we'll certainly follow up on this story if more news comes out. 3 firefighters have died in Washington attempting to put out major wildfires plaguing the western state. They died last night near the town of Twisp, where major fires continue to burn and where residents have been evacuated from. The 3 were trapped when the winds changed direction. Governor Jay Inslee said he plans to declare a state of emergency in eastern Washington. He told press the current fires will exacerbate the ongoing housing shortages and economic troubles felt throughout the region. A total of 11 counties and 4 indigenous tribes are impacted by the fires. The U.S. Forest Service just released a report on the large number of fires in the U.S. and how they're increasing each year, and the report blames climate change for the increase. Chenjerai, shouldn't these 3 firefighters be considered casualties of climate change?
Absolutely. There was a National Federal Advisory Committee put together in 2009, and they released a report it's called the Global Change Research Program. And in 2009, they identified, increased risk of fire as climate continues to change, could add firefighting resources, and they basically recommended that firefighting resources and improving evacuation procedures and communication infrastructure was key. They also recommended that we're going to need regularly updated insights into what the latest climate science implies for locations, timing, potential severity of fire risks, and other types of social and economic institutions. Also, in the meantime, you have local organizations like National Firewise Communities, which is an interagency program that encourages wildfire preparedness, such as trying to create defensible space around residential structures. But ultimately, we're really going to have to start getting serious about climate change.
And finally, Donald Trump is embarrassing his party once again, this time by using the racist term anchor babies in a discussion on immigration. The blustering GOP presidential candidate used the term on Fox News to assert that he thinks children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrants should not be considered citizens. While many Republicans fear Trump will chase off Latino voters, analysis of his plan compared to other GOP immigration plans finds little difference. Already, presidential candidate Scott Walker has signed on to Trump's idea of stripping citizenship from U.S.-born children of immigrants. According to the Washington Post, quote, Trump's immigration plan hews pretty closely to the Republican Party's existing platform. Its official plank of policy ideas, much of Trump's huge immigration plan should sound quite familiar. Well, should Trump, Chenjerai, be seen as an outlier or just openly saying what the rest of the GOP espouses but refuses to say out loud?
Well, I think this is the key question. You know, people like to look at Trump as some kind of outlier or some kind of, or in some circles, people look at him as a clown. But I think we have to look at the tremendous support that Trump has. You know, defending undocumented immigrants really doesn't have much of an upside unless you actually care about Latino people, not just looking at them as voters. If you're only looking at them as voters, you know, the states that have a big Hispanic population and have big electoral college numbers like California, Texas, New York, New Jersey, they're not going to really be like swing states in the 2000 presidential election. And in the swing states, there's not huge Hispanic population. So it could be that the GOP is just willing to sacrifice these voters and to galvanize its base. But let me also just say that when it comes to these kinds of statements, we know that like these deeply racist and problematic views, political communication is a place where those kinds of ideas proliferate, if we even think back to the Southern strategy with Black people and things like this. So,
Chenjerai, thank you as always for joining us. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. This is Uprising. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali. If activists with Black Lives Matter have put police on notice because they film them every chance they get, police apparently are doing some of the same. A new analysis by the Intercept, based on internal documents it obtained, has found extensive surveillance of activists with Black Lives Matter in New York. According to my guest, George Malia Joseph, quote, this appears to be the first documented proof of the frequent presence of undercover police at Black Lives Matter protests in the city of New York, though many activists have suspected their presence since mass protests erupted there last year over a grand jury's decision not to indict Daniel Pantaleo, a police officer involved in the death of Eric Garner. George Joseph is a reporter with The Intercept, focusing on education, labor, and police, and he now joins me from New York. Welcome to Uprising, George.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, first, how did you obtain the documents, and why did you even think to request them?
So actually, I didn't request them. I had done a story a few weeks ago in which I did a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request from the federal government, and I got hundreds of documents from the Department of Homeland Security showing extensive surveillance of Black Lives Matter across the country. And so some activists, having read my report on that, reached out to me with some documents that they had done through a local records request in New York, a FOIL request. And so they gave me the documents, and from there I went with it.
So, and I want to talk about what you found at the federal level a little bit later, but let's focus on New York, because this is the news story. What do the documents reveal? How systematic of a surveillance are local agencies conducting on Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, so frankly, I was surprised at how much the documents revealed. In the first cover letter page of the documents, that both the MTA and the Metro North, the two transit systems that we got documents from, admitted that they had to redact a lot of names in the documents because those names would reveal the identities of undercover police officers. So we see almost 200 references to undercover police officers popping up very frequently throughout all the documents, attending the protests, providing intel on where protesters are going, specifically alluding to certain key prominent protesters. And we're not even sure if that's all they did, because there's a lot that, they may have not typed up necessarily and could have just been doing over walkie-talkies or whatever. But it's very clear that undercovers were attending these protests. The other thing that the document...
George, are you with us? It looks like our video stream just froze for a second. We'll try to get George back on with us. George Malia Carl Joseph is a reporter with the Intercept, focusing on education, labor, and the police, and he has written an article for the Intercept about the documents that he got from activists who obtained them. George, are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, okay, continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so like I was saying, in addition to the documents showing that there were a frequent presence of undercover police officers at these protests, which the documents constantly refer to as peaceful and orderly, there are also specific photos of prominent protesters with their names attached that are sprinkled throughout the documents, which was one of the creepiest things that I found.
So, and just going back to the question of how systematic is it? I mean, obviously the police can't keep track of everybody involved in Black Lives Matter. Are they sort of singling out, as far as you can tell, people who they think are in leadership positions? Are they keeping some kind of detailed dossiers on them? Or is it sort of random?
It's difficult to say systematically because, as I mentioned, these documents only came from 2 of our New York transit systems. We didn't even get documents back from the NYPD itself. We got several documents which included references to the NYPD, but the NYPD is notorious in New York, and you can ask any reporter, for being very obstinate and not complying with requests for records. So the sort of glimpses that we have through these documents is probably only a fraction of what's actually going on. But it does seem like they are targeting people who are either prominent activists or prominent documenters of activism. So people that they may fear are showing the larger audience outside of New York, in the larger country world, what's going on. So there's specific pictures of several photographers and people who clearly are notable in New York for documenting sort of police brutality, police violence.
So they're worried about those who are watching them, essentially.
Yes, exactly. That's what that's what it seems to be from the documents. I can't definitively say, and I'm not sure if there's a set policy, obviously, but if you look at police conduct towards other people across the country who have filmed police and sort of shown them to be abusing their power, for instance, the man who filmed the killing of Eric Garner, they've been harassed by police ever since. So police forces seem to be organizing to send messages that exposing this truth is dangerous.
Now, George, is the surveilling that is happening in New York being done by infiltrators, people who are sort of trying to mingle with the protesters, appear as though they're one of them, and then take photos? Or is it, men and women using zoom lenses from atop buildings, or both?
So it seems like it's both, although we don't know to what degree they're infiltrating. So there's definitely like zoom lensing happening all over the place. If you just go to a Grand Central protest, you'll see these special cameras that are perched atop Grand Central staring down at people as long as they're protesting, as long as they're moving around. We also, from the documents, as I mentioned, know the undercover police are present and active at protests. We just don't know to what extent they're, maybe going to meetings afterwards or organizing things or embedding themselves within the movement. We do have like very recent precedent from Occupy Wall Street, in which NYPD officials were actually, like a detective, were actually going to occupy people's birthday parties, happy hours, like very intimate events. So it's not necessarily limited to just attending the protest themselves, but we can't say for sure because the documents don't say.
And what sort of interagency collaboration did you find from the documents? You mentioned Transit Authority, Metropolitan Transit Authority, their police are involved. Are different agencies sharing information with one another?
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't include all of this in my article, but there's information being shared between the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, its railroad, the Metro North, the NYPD, and the New York State Police. So those are four of the agencies that came up frequently. And so various officials, counter-terror officials from the MTA, NYPD intelligence officers, regular NYPD people, and certain state police were being CC'd, sending messages over email, sharing information. Definitely, it was much more beyond just the MTA's jurisdiction.
And they're deploying their counterterrorism unit on this, which of course implies that they're worried about activists getting violent. But then if they're specifically going after those who are documenting protests as well, that seems to contradict the real motivation.
Well, it was funny because in the documents, it kept referring to how peaceful and orderly the protesters were. And when I emailed the MTA asking for a comment on this, saying, like, are you still sending these counter-terror officials, even if you know that things are peaceful, even if you know they're orderly, they responded to me with a really telling statement, which said, you know, we have a lot of terrorist threats all the time, and we have a lot of protests. And they just sort of said those two things together as if those, you know, go hand in hand. And to most people, they don't, obviously, because there's a big difference between attending a peaceful protest and being a quote-unquote terrorist. But nonetheless, you've seen in the post 9/11 era, particularly, this sort of weird fusion of any sort of political dissent with the vague idea of terrorism. And Bill Bratton, the New York Police Department's commissioner, has been very explicit about that. Last January, as I alluded to in the article, he formed a new strategic response group unit, which he claimed was going to be equipped to handle both situations like the Eric Garner protest and the Mumbai terrorist attacks. So he's comparing these situations as if they require similar tactics and therefore similar approaches, thereby criminalizing protesters and treating them as terrorists.
Now, how legal is this? I understand you spoke with an ACLU representative about this, because we're supposed to, in theory, according to the document that we know as the Constitution, have the right to protest.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because from the documents we know that the MTA is doing a lot of this on-the-ground surveillance, but the documents, you know, redacted the names of who the undercover police officers were. So we're not exactly sure which agencies they were a part of. Now, nonetheless, in the documents, there are references to the NYPD working in conjunction with MTA officials to produce or share at least these photos of individual protesters and create field reports of protests. And that in itself would seem to be a violation of the NYPD's historic handshoe guidelines. And just to go back to that for viewers who don't know, the handshoe guidelines were part of a court litigation through the 70s and 80s that reined in the NYPD's monitoring of political protest and just public events in general. And it said that, according to the state courts, you can only investigate political activity if you have a specific sort of criminal threat or suspicion of criminal activity. Unfortunately, after 9/11, the NYPD used the excuse of terrorism to loosen this standard. And so now they just have to have a reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. But even by that standard, the documents continually refer to these protests as orderly, peaceful, and they keep saying, like, oh, it's just the regular routine. They know what they were doing. They know how many people were going to be there, that it wasn't going to be violent. Yet they were still collecting photos and, you know, tracking people's movements. So it would seem to pose serious questions about whether what the police forces in New York were doing was legal. But, you know,
and now,
I'm
George,
not a lawyer.
Are they also monitoring Black Lives Matter activists on social media and sort of corroborating the physical surveillance that they're doing with online surveillance?
Yeah, in the documents, there are a couple allusions to activists posted XY pictures. Here's something from Twitter. Here's some protest information, which the specific locations and stuff, which are probably gleaned from social media. So there's several explicit references to social media monitoring, definitely.
You mentioned earlier that there were photos that you found of prominent activists with their names under it. One of the people that you pointed out in your article was former Philadelphia police officer Ray Lewis, who's now an activist, and he was holding a sign saying, "Police try kindness." Why would his photo be taken? I mean, his message is pretty benign.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're worried about him as a figure to have like a ex-police officer basically protesting the abuses of police. Sort of, I don't know. It's powerful. I spoke with Ray Lewis on the phone yesterday, and he told me actually that he had been at a protest in D.C. apparently, and the Department of Homeland Security police were there, and one of them came up to him and he reached out to shake his hand saying, "I'm Captain Ray Lewis." And the guy was like, "I know who you are. We had to watch a video about you." So there seems to be like a sort of maybe sometimes nationwide law enforcement focus on some of these protesters who they view as potentially galvanizing for the movement.
Now, one of the issues, of course, that comes up whenever this sort of surveillance is discovered is how widespread is it? Do you think that what's happening in New York might be typical of or might hint at what is happening in other cities and around the country?
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if it weren't. We've already seen a couple indications of undercover police being used. If you just do a quick Google search, it's definitely happened in Minneapolis, but we don't know to what extent that is regular. And there are also rumors of it happening on the West Coast in Seattle, for example. But a lot more work needs to be done to investigate to what degree this is a nationwide problem, although any activist you talk to who's sort of been doing this work for years will probably have stories to tell you. But to get it in documents is a rare thing.
And I'd mentioned people have sort of been sensing, in New York at least, that they were being watched. I mean, you can tell when somebody appears as though they don't really belong and all they're doing is quietly, taking notes or taking photographs. Are the infiltrators, and is the surveillance pretty obvious?
I think there's different levels of it. So on the one hand, you can clearly see the police's cameras up above you all the time. You can see police in uniform with their phones out recording you or with actual cameras recording you. So there's that level of it. But then there's also a lot of people who maybe are just photojournalists or who maybe are just sort of tourist protesters or that sort of thing. So it's very difficult to ever know exactly who is posting photos and for what purpose, especially in the age of social media when at every protest, hundreds of people are just taking pictures anyway and tweeting them to get lots of followers and whatnot.
You're right. Now, let's also talk about the fact that the federal level surveillance is happening. That was something that you reported on earlier. If we're seeing local city level surveillance in places like New York, and then there's federal level surveillance that you have found with the Department of Homeland Security, what does that mean? Is there sort of this web of surveillance from the local to the federal level?
Yeah, there is. I mean,
specifically targeting Black Lives Matter, I should say.
Yes, definitely. It's specifically targeting Black Lives Matter. It sort of reflects the post 9/11 security state apparatus, which has this desire to share as much information as possible. So after 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security set up these things called fusion centers, which were supposedly supposed to be like quickly sharing information among local and federal law enforcement to stop terrorist attacks. Well, it turns out that those sort of centers are being used frequently to share information about peaceful protests or just Black Lives Matter protests in general. So we see that infrastructure, which was supposedly being used to stop terrorism, being turned against ordinary people voicing their dissent against police violence. It's very frequent. The thing is, what's interesting though is that Department of Homeland Security, a lot of their work is social media monitoring, and occasionally they've sent police and their own sort of forces into sites like Baltimore. But I think the more intensive monitoring from the federal level is probably coming from the FBI, and I've been working on getting documents from them, but it's very difficult compared to the DHS because the FBI is probably doing much more damning stuff, and they're harder to get documents from. It's sort of like how you can get documents from the MTA, but you can't get them from the NYPD.
Right, so we should assume that there is plenty of surveillance happening. Finally, it seems as though this kind of revelation can have quite a chilling effect on protests, and that might also be a side effect, even if the police don't necessarily want us to know that they're spying on folks, but the revelation could have a chilling effect on protests. Do you think that that can end up being a side effect or a result of the reporting?
I don't think it's really a result of the reporting because if you're actually like a Black Lives Matter organizer, you know that you're being watched. I mean, you can tell just by seeing the frequent cameras, the sort of frequent interactions you have with specific police officers all the time. So this isn't really news to activists. I think it may be news to the general public who hasn't been involved. And I hope that the reporting may push people to reconsider who exactly is being the violent force. Is it people protesting about police killings, or is it the federal government and the state government and the local government, which is monitoring people and using counterterrorism apparatuses just to sort of chill people away from acting?
Well, where's the best place for people to read your work, George?
My latest two investigations into surveillance of Black Lives Matter are both on the Intercept. So if you go to the Intercept website and look up my author page, all of it will be there.
And we'll post a link to that from our page at uprisingwithsonali.com later today. George, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. My guest is George Malia Joseph. He is a reporter with The Intercept, focusing on education, labor, and police, writing about police surveillance, both on a local and federal level, of Black Lives Matter. This is Uprising, and when we come back from our break, we'll actually speak to a journalist who recently witnessed a police abusive situation in San Francisco. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Uprising. I'm Sonali Kohatkar. On August 4th, a disabled African-American man was slammed to the ground in San Francisco by a number of police officers. The man had a prosthetic leg and was in pain, but this did not deter the 5 officers standing over him from slamming him down and putting their weight on the lower half of his body. On the scene, by coincidence, was Elle Magazine journalist Chaédria LaBouvier, who did what anybody in this day and age in the U.S. does. She whipped out her smartphone and she started filming. Here are the first few seconds of a more than 10-minute video that would go viral.
Wait, you're on his prosthetic leg? You're on his prosthetic leg. You're on his prosthetic leg. Stop. Stop.
And that is the first few seconds of a video that was shot by my guest, Chaédria LaBouvier, who now joins me in studio. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. What went through your mind when you first started filming? Clearly, you were upset, as anybody would be, at seeing this treatment.
Well, you know, it's funny. I was talking to one of my mentors the other day, and who's a journalist who trained me, and we were just, you know, before you're a writer, a journalist, or whatever profession you are, you're a human being. And so, you know, I responded as a human being would respond to that. You know, you're thinking, oh my gosh, and just knowing what you know about police right now, when you see, you know, this one person who's physically, you know, compromised, and then you see this blue wall forming, you just know that's not good. So, you know, as a human being, I wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to be killed. But, you know, as a writer, I was incredibly interested in what was obviously a story to me.
At one point, there were more than a dozen officers involved. Let's watch another clip of the video you shot where you describe what the officers are doing.
A handicapped man is half naked, and he's telling them, I'm using the sticks to walk, and they have this man pinned on the ground, half naked.
They threw his ass on the ground.
They did, I saw it.
Put him down and they threw me down. No, we're going to make you go to the hospital because of your leg. I said, no, I'm going to go to Walgreens to get some crutches.
And that was another clip from the video that Chaédria shot. Do you know how it all started? What was the deal with his crutches that he was using to walk with? Did they arrest him because of his crutches?
So the SFPDs released this statement that, oh, you know, we were like he was in the street and he's this mental health hazard to himself and to others. But on the scene, they were telling people that they were responding to a call from someone inside of a deli saying that there was someone waving crutches. So the story has completely changed, which is typical when you look at how the police control the narrative. I didn't see that. I was able to see a lot of it before this swarm of police officers came, and I just didn't see that. I saw the man give his crutches to an officer. So this idea that they were taken or you know, thrown on the ground, that just doesn't corroborate with anything that I've seen or what other people on the scene saw.
I mean, it's amazing because he is clearly disabled.
Yeah, I saw that because that happened on 7th, between 8th and 7th, and I saw that from pretty far away that he was disabled because his pant leg was rolled up, so you can see
the prosthetic leg.
Yeah, you can see that from very far away.
And so somehow the police thought that he was enough of a threat that 5 of them had to jump on top of him. Did they? I mean, obviously they knew that he had a prosthetic leg, and they still, I mean, when you watch the video, which is available online, not only is there a cop sitting on top of the bottom half of this person's body, but also pressing down on top of his prosthetic leg,
and stomping on it. Yeah, it's disgusting, you know, and I don't think that, you know, there's this idea that you're not supposed to say these things, especially if you're the one that's reporting it or putting that out into the world. But I don't think that I think to be objective, which I think some people take that to mean you're not saying that this is disgusting or that this is, you know, unacceptable. I think if that's what being objective means, then I think that you're doing a bad job as a human, you know, and there's just you don't need 5 people physically on top of someone who's disabled, and then you make a call for more. That wasn't just, you know, and you can see in the process of the 11 minutes and then the total, I think, of 27 minutes altogether, someone's making a call for more people to come.
Because there aren't enough people subduing an unarmed, homeless, disabled man.
Right. So
who's
that's
on the ground already.
Right. So, and I spoke to a witness who said that there were like police cars parked, like from at 7th and 7th and Mission, or I can't remember the street, but I recorded him, and so. Yeah, I mean, that was a call that was made.
In the process of slamming this man down onto the ground, his pants had slid down, exposing him. And the police, for a very long time, did nothing to cover him. I mean, it seemed to me that to them, he was not even human.
No, of course not. We have this thing that we're not talking about. I mean, so a couple of disabled rights activists have, reached out, and I think that they have a very interesting point in that they say, this video for them highlights how often disabled people are treated by the police. It highlights for them this intersection of race, class, disability in a very vivid way. But, he was not entitled to human dignity to them. And so they treated him with as much as they thought that he was worth, which was nothing.
And of course, the police are not used to people questioning them, but in one of the moments in your video that jumped out at me was how you stood up to one of the cops who told you to back up as you were filming. So let's play that clip.
I'm
I'm letting
fine.
you know you're more than welcome to film.
I am, but I'm making you uncomfortable because this man is telling you what happened, and I'm filming. I'm not even in your perimeter. You came to me to tell me I need to back up. I wasn't. That's a lie. It's on videotape where I was standing. It's on video where I was standing. I wasn't standing there. You need to film that so you can take that back to the police on proper policing, because this is not it. So I hope that you take that to your boss to show them bad policing, because this isn't it.
Now that was pretty gutsy, Chaédria. We are trained in our society to bow down to officers. I don't know if I would have had the courage to say this to officers, even though it was broad daylight and there were a lot of people around. What motivated that response?
Well, so...
Because the police usually don't need much reason to just, grab your phone or slam you down. I mean, they could have done anything to you.
Yeah, they could have. I tend to describe myself as having no chill. So it's just sort of the best way to describe that. I mean, I'm no stranger to the police in terms of this coverage. You've been writing about Black Lives Matter and about police brutality for Elle. Yeah, and before that, I was doing some stuff with other outlets, and I've done activism around this, and I'm very connected with people on the grassroots in terms of, like, you see how that happens, you see how that goes down. And I don't know, I just was thinking, no, this is a story, and you are not going to bully me because you don't want this to be out. And so... No chill. No chill. No chill.
Do you know what ended up happening to the man in question, who I'm assuming was arrested? Do we know anything about him? His name?
I try to get. I don't know if it's on the whole 11 minutes because I haven't gone to YouTube to watch it since. Because I had to watch it so many times to get the time dates. We did try to get his name. I think he said his name was Wusa or something, but no one could really tell, and we didn't know what that was. And so, when I tried to call the jail, because that's where I thought he was going to be, no one had any record of a Wusa, so I have no idea who he is.
And of course, he was likely charged with resisting arrest simply for saying, "I'm in pain, please get off of me," which is what he was trying to do. He was on the ground face down, and yet, of course, he had to breathe. Anybody with a pulse these days, if they are still alive when the police have them, can be charged with resisting arrest. So we don't know what his charges might be.
Well, we do know the police, SFPD released a statement a couple of days ago saying that he had been released without charges.
Okay. But they didn't identify him?
They didn't identify him, and not to my knowledge anyway. And, you know, I think that I don't know if he was charged and the charges were dropped. I have not, you know, I don't know. It's been really busy with over on my side of things, but I think that part of him not being charged is this video. You know, it would just be terrible, you know, just a terrible move for them to charge this man after this video has been released into the world. So I'm not surprised that they would do that, since they are, you know, doing PR spin.
And at one point during the recording, you can hear a bystander telling the man who thought he was basically going to get killed. He said, "Don't worry, they won't shoot you. That's why we're recording." I thought it was a really powerful statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I stayed. You know, that's why I have so much footage. And I think, like, if you know, I haven't talked to my editors about what we're going to do with the other 20-something minutes, but we, you know, at one point you could hear me on the tape saying, well, I want to make sure that he, you know, lives. I want to make sure that he's alive. And we were all out there, and you can see, like, as the camera's moving, that, you know, I'm catching the corner of other people's, like, smartphones, because we were all like, we don't want him to die. And he said, you know, "They're gonna shoot me, man." And then the man said, you know, "That's why we're out here." So
now I want to play one last clip from the video you shot about how the public trust in the police has been so eroded. Here again is my guest, Chaédria LaBouvier. She's behind the camera, but you can hear her voice.
It would be far more effective if you were interested in being good police officers instead of looking like good police officers. That would be so much more effective if you were that interested in doing your job well instead of looking like you were doing your job well. I mean, y'all don't even have enough respect to pull his pants up. I've been shooting this for almost 10 minutes and saying that, and they just pulled up his pants now. That's ridiculous. That's poor policing. And then you wonder why people don't trust you and why people don't like you. It's because you act like you are enemies of the community, not here to protect and serve communities. This is not good policing. This is sad when people feel that they have to film you to make sure that people don't die. This is sad. We have to police the police officers because we do not trust that they won't kill him.
And that is Chaédria LaBouvier, part of an 11-minute video, of a longer video that she has released that focused on the police arrest, lengthy police arrest of a homeless African-American disabled man who had a prosthetic leg. I think it really captured what people feel about police brutality today. And the way in which there's just, you know, there was very little public trust in certain communities to begin with.
Right.
Now, that is spreading far and wide.
Well, I think it should. I mean, what you see, police brutality, you know, people are used to seeing that being a black problem, you know, but the thing, if you are a student of history, is that oppression is perfected on the black community and then it is exported to other communities. So it really behooves people to be very concerned when you're seeing this ridiculous amount of oppression happening, because when it's to that level with black people, that means that the next wave of people, the next group are next. And so you know, and you're starting to see more white people concerned about that. Their children are beginning to get killed. You have Zach Hammond, you know.
Zachary Hammond, yes, in South Carolina.
In South Carolina. And this is not, I mean, when you have a over-militarized police state that believes that they are entitled to absolute power, what makes you think, if they believe that they have absolute power, that this is just going to be limited to Black people? Like that's wishful thinking. And so, which is why, in the article that I wrote, I said, what will the tech community do about this? Because this is in their backyard. And in the most technologically advanced city in this country, arguably the world, if the local police force cannot have body cameras, where else in America can we set that precedence? And I think that the tech community, given the disproportionate amount of resources that they have a responsibility to make sure that they are setting a technological precedence that changes lives. That's what they do. And so making sure that the local police force has body cameras is a part of that innovation responsibility that they have.
Of course, body cameras are only one part of a solution,
Right.
and we've
Absolutely.
seen in the recent past that when police have had body cameras and there's been body camera footage available, if it's been incriminating, they've been worried about releasing it, and they've been forced to release it.
Right. I mean, but that's the great thing about Silicon Valley is that you can put that on a cloud.
Right.
You can put that on a cloud. You can have, because the police investigate themselves. SFPD is having an internal investigation to investigate if policies and procedures were violated. The great thing about the tech community is that they have built an industry disrupting authority or circumventing the parts of authority that they don't trust. If you can make cars drive themselves, you can figure out a way to create body cameras that stream to a cloud.
The other aspect of what happened with this man that we need to talk about is that it certainly seems to be part of the push by police to, quote, clean up the backyard of the tech community, of very wealthy entrepreneurs who, of course, don't like to see the grit of real life, to see class differences manifested in a homeless person.
Right, which is, everything that you said is true. And so the tech community has a responsibility to step up because this is being done partially in their name.
Yeah.
And that's a responsibility if you don't stand for that, to reject that. Because right now, the police believe that they're doing them a favor.
Yeah. In the earlier part of our program, we talked about the surveillance that police are doing of Black Lives Matter activists in New York, but of course, federally, that's happening as well, likely happening in other parts of the country. And much of it seems to be focused on those who are documenting police brutality, the cop watch groups, but then also journalists like yourself, bystanders who pull out their cameras. But that seems to be a very effective way to police the police, because if your video and the videos of other people may likely have led to this person being released without any charges, then in a very effective way, you have put the police on notice.
Absolutely. I'm not afraid to do that. I don't think that anyone should be afraid to do that. The police are here to protect and serve you. They're here to protect and serve.
They seem to forget that a lot.
And they forget that. They're supposed to be peace officers in the community, protecting. And so you don't need, the SF Police Department requested a mine-proof vehicle. Why do they need that?
A mine-proof vehicle.
Yeah, it's online. It's actually linked it in the article.
Right.
So until we get to a place where the police are able to show that they are responsible with the implicit trust that they believe that they're entitled to, then we have to make sure that we have to police them.
And so this request for a mine-proof vehicle is part of that militarization that we've seen all over the country. Here in Los Angeles, where this program is recorded, we have a long history of a militarized police force. We saw that in Ferguson last year when literally armored trucks rolled through the streets as if it was an occupying army.
This week, if you're, paying attention to the visuals of what's going on in St. Louis, They were shooting tear gas out of tanks. I mean, this is not, 1984, the book. I mean, this is real. And so San Francisco has to ask themselves, they've put a lot of energy into making the city bike proof, or bike friendly. Do you want tanks just like rolling down your bike lanes? Like, do you want that juxtaposition and conflict of interest? I mean, those two things represent such different things in your community. And so, the police have taken the liberty from the war on drugs when everyone, thought that, we had to go into these inner cities where people live and literally create a war. And, and the police have never been reined in or checked since then.
And just yesterday in St. Louis, an 18-year-old boy killed by police going in to execute a search warrant in St. Louis in a, quote, troubled neighborhood.
Right.
And of course, after they shot him, all they had to do, or they think they had to do, is say there was crack cocaine on the scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens, And the thing that, the police need better training. The Dallas police, there's a Dallas police, I believe he's a captain or sergeant, I can't remember his title. Vernon Hale, he told me via email that his men are trained to shoot for mass. And so that's what they, that takes no training. I can shoot for mass. I don't even own a gun, and I can shoot for mass. These are people who are literally on the front line of people's lives. And, I had an official of the police department who manages police officers tell me, my men are trained to shoot for mass. And so we have to demand better training. You have to demand that they have that training reflects the seriousness of their job, which is to protect lives. And right now, they think that they are in a paramilitary army, and that they're just like, this is little, these neighborhoods are mini Afghanistans, and that is not the case.
Chaédria, you are a journalist, and it happened to be that you were on the scene with a camera, right?
Right.
So I want to ask you to give our audience some advice, because you knew, you just sort of had a sense immediately of how to film, how long to film, where to focus on, the questions to ask as a journalist would, and what to do with the footage once you walked away from the scene, how to follow up. I'm wondering if you can give advice to our audience, because there's going to be times when people in our audience are going to find themselves in a similar position. They may not quite, have at the top of their heads how they should think as a journalist, but today everybody with a smartphone is a citizen journalist, which is a great thing, and I as a journalist think it's a great thing.
I think it's wonderful. Yes, I was incredibly prepared, to be there. The coincidence, like you can't make that up. But I think things that people can do, I always carry and travel with a battery pack, a charger. I never, have my phone not charged, or, methods of charging it.
Make sure there's enough space for footage.
Yeah.
Don't get filled up,
Absolutely. Like making sure that you have enough, go through your camera and just try to poke through the camera, the recorder, just so that, when you do see something, it's not the first time that you're learning how to use it. All of those things are on smartphones, or you can download them pretty easily. Also, a voice recorder to ask people if there are people around, what they've seen or what they've heard. I did that in this incident.
to corroborate witness accounts. They might have seen something that you didn't see beforehand.
Right. So I got two witnesses because I stayed so long that a lot of people dispersed. And I had to make that choice between, do I need the footage or the witnesses? And so I was able to get a few, like two, but for me it was as a human being, I wanted to make sure that this person didn't die. And so, not everyone's going to be on their way to their editor's office as I was that afternoon. But what you can do is you can contact, local news sites or blogs or, and say,
This is after the fact, once you have the footage, yeah.
Right, and just say, I have this footage and I saw this and what should I do with this? And you don't necessarily have to be responsible for writing the story. Maybe you can give that to someone who can write that and they credit you for taking that footage.
There's also, if people are worried about being targeted, the ACLU has a great app which allows you to instantly, to a cloud, your footage gets uploaded so that even if your phone is confiscated and you're yourself arrested, the footage is safe.
Absolutely. I actually need to download the app myself. I know I have a friend who's a lawyer for the ACLU, and she was telling me about it actually when I was in San Francisco. But also too, most reporters, journalists, writers, they're not going to reveal their sources. So if you have something and you don't want to be that byline, that front line on that, you can give that to a reporter and they need to know who you are, but they can say this was taken by an anonymous source, and then they're, responsible for writing that.
And also when you're actually doing the filming, I think trying to zoom in on the victim and so that you have on film what's happening to them, maybe even getting their voice if they are trying to say something, trying to get that, which we can hear in your video for our audience. They can check it out online and hear him saying, I'm in pain, I'm in pain.
That's important. I mean, I'm also a film school graduate, so I was incredibly, incredibly prepared for that moment. But you just think, anyone can think like a journalist, there's no one's born to do this, and so you can just say, well, because I was thinking, what would people think? Would people say that he's not in pain? And I wanted people to be able to.
proof of it.
I wanted people to know
and
that.
And we'll link to that on our site later today. Chaédria, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck to you.
Thank you for having me.
My guest, Chaédria LaBouvier, is a reporter for Elle Magazine, and we'll post a link to her video from our website. This is Uprising. Anna Buss is our assistant producer and technical director. Christian Beck is our production coordinator. Kiana Turner is our visual editor. Teddy Robinson is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Stan Mizrahi for technical assistance. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Uprising with Sonali. Our website is uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Golhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. I'll see you next time.